Donald Trump put a 20-year-old Discord mod in charge of the Center for Counterterrorism. The Center for Counterterrorism, these are the analysts that caught bin Laden. And now there's a 20-year-old with zero government experience who used to be a Discord mod, who's now in charge of that. Hello everyone, and welcome to the first and perhaps only installment, we will have to see, of my foray into longer content. If you don't know me, my name is B. I run a TikTok account called Campaign Dispatch, and I won't say popular demand because it was like 4 people, but by some kind of demand, I am making a longer form piece of content. So for today, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a mailbag episode where I'm going to be answering some questions that I got sent over on TikTok, either in DMs or comments. I got one email that was extraneous to this. It was just someone asking for book recommendations, which is another question I got, and so I'm going to provide some in this video. And I sent a very detailed list because I love giving book recommendations and I also love answering your emails. This person, I'm not going to put them on blast, but this person was like, this is probably super weird to be emailing you. And I was like, no, I have my email in my bio for a reason. So if you want to email me, chances are I'm going to respond. My email is bn.campaigndispatch. It's just my TikTok username at gmail.com. And if you email me, especially asking for book recommendations, I will give you one hell of a response. So anyway, if you have questions, please feel free to submit them there. And let's just jump right in here. All right, so our first question is from Molly Page EQ, and she asks, did you listen to the Coates and Klein podcast? Would love to hear your take on that whole situation. Okay, so the short answer is yes. For those who aren't aware, I'm just going to fill in a little bit of background. Ezra Klein, who is a sort of like, I guess, podcaster and opinion columnist at the New York Times, and a guy who co-wrote a book with Derek Thompson called Abundance, and he's sort of this like thought leader, so to speak. I don't know, I hate that term, but like he's a public intellectual who is very influential with the consultant class of liberal people in Washington. Basically, Ezra had a conversation with Ta-Nehisi Coates. And it was a conversation that was sort of like fueled by a central disagreement, which was after, okay, this is really a lot more complicated than I thought it would be to explain to someone who's not chronically online and completely has their head in all this like political nonsense. But after Charlie Kirk was shot and killed, Ezra Klein wrote a column in the New York Times entitled, and I'm going to pull up the article because I don't want to put words in his mouth. Woof. Okay. Okay, so this is rough. The title is Charlie Kirk Was Practicing Politics the Right Way. And this was, I believe, the leading opinion column in the New York Times the day after Charlie Kirk was shot. And I read it when it came out. I'm reading through it again. It's very laudatory. But anyway, Ta-Nehisi Coates published basically a response to this. And Ta-Nehisi and Ezra Klein are actually friends. And this comes out in the conversation they have. Like, they are longtime friends. Ta-Nehisi has been on the Ezra Klein podcast before. And by the way, like, I encourage everyone to watch this interview for themselves. Like, there's been a lot of politicking about what was said and what's going on. And one of my least favorite things on the internet, which is like body language experts being like, ooh, this really proves that like Ezra's a narcissist. I'm like, you need to get a job. Anyway, in response to Ezra Klein's very laudatory opinion about Charlie Kirk and holding him up as this exemplar for how politics is supposed to be practiced, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote this response that was published in some magazine, I forget which, where he basically recounted the record of the things that Charlie Kirk had said, like just the black letter quotes of things he had said in the last election, before that, right? And makes a very compelling case that in many ways, Charlie Kirk was a hate monger. He was a guy who made a shit ton of money being provocative, which is not illegal, but it's not commendable, I don't think, trying to get a rise out of people. but also he was race baiting. He was saying some really, really hateful things. And I said this in the video I made about Charlie Kirk, is like, this is a guy who, every time he talked about abortion, the thrust of what he was saying was, a woman's place is beneath her husband. She is to be servile to men. She's not to think or to vote or to exercise freedom or bodily autonomy. She exists for the purpose of the state, for the purpose of men, and she exists to pump out babies and be quiet. And we can't, that's not something we debate about. That's not something we have polite disagreements about. It's not something that, like, we can, resort to rational, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, like, we're going to have our marketplace of ideas. Like, no, this is my humanity, and you're trying to deny it. And then you're calling me crazy when I'm like, I don't want to fucking debate my humanity. Same goes for the way that Charlie Kirk talked about people who were not white, right? He talked about people invading our country. The way he talked about Haitian immigrants in the lead up to the 2024 election, some of the most disgusting things ever. I can't even repeat them. And really, he was a white nationalist. He was a white nationalist. And Ta-Nehisi Coates lays all this out. And he says to Ezra Klein, this is not a model for politics. This guy was a hate monger. And to act like he was this exemplar for the way politics ought to be practiced, and as if we should all emulate Charlie Kirk, is sorely mistaken. In a lot of ways, I think the disagreement between Ezra and Ta-Nehisi was really emblematic of a broader disagreement on the left side of the political spectrum in the United States. And to be clear, like, I really think I agreed more with Ta-Nehisi Coates than Ezra Klein, in that, in a lot of ways, they're having two separate conversations, right? Ezra Klein is saying, I want to build power in America using the levers of institutions and systems that already exist. And to me, that means practicing the kind of politics that Charlie Kirk was practicing. And what Ta-Nehisi was saying was, you are becoming your enemy. You are compromising values. And when you strive for raw power, you abandon the things you purport to stand for. And by the way, it is not the job of a writer to think up political strategy. It's not the job of a writer to strategize about how to build power, so much as it is the job of a writer to be honest and open about what things are. This is for those of you who've been watching me closely, I'm taking a class on James Baldwin right now, and I've been thinking a lot about Baldwin. This is something Baldwin talks about all the time. He sees his job as being a witness, right? As telling the truth about the way the world is and the way the country is. And not to sugarcoat it, and not to, say things that are going to be, not to speak like a politician. And Ta-Nehisi Coates, makes this recognition that is so important. He says, I realize that as a writer, I say things that politicians could never say, right? He's written several books about, the state of race relations in America that are very hard truths. They're bleak, as James Baldwin would say, puts him in the position of a kind of Jeremiah. But the reality is, this is the way things are. And what separates the boys from the men, so to speak, in terms of writing, is who can tell the truth about the world and the way the world is, without sugarcoating it. And in a lot of ways, there's this moment where Ta-Nehisi says to Ezra, what do you think your role is? As a writer, as a public intellectual. And Ezra Klein says, I don't know. And that's very telling. Because, I think there's a point to what Ezra's saying, which is basically the work of politics is important, and we can't forget that. The tactical work of politics and building power in this country is important, because if we don't win elections, we can't do anything. We can't protect the people that Ta-Nehisi Coates is saying, look, we got to protect these people. And yes, I lean towards Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I think I agree with him almost entirely in terms of this disagreement. But I also recognize what Ezra's saying. Politics and writing, right? Politics and bearing witness are two separate enterprises. And I think Ta-Nehisi recognizes that. In fact, I know he does. And what he's saying to Ezra Klein is, if you want to be a political strategist, you should go and do that. But the business we're in writing, right, being public intellectuals, like, our job isn't to be political strategists. Our job is to tell the truth. And you're not telling the truth if you want to write this glowing eulogy of Charlie Kirk, who was a hate monger, right? And it's the difficult truth. It's truth that you get attacked for saying, but it's, it's controversial, but it's the truth. And the role of the writer is to tell the truth. And I think he's totally right. And so, yes, I think they're talking past each other a little bit. But I think the fact of the matter is that since Trump came along, the stakes are so high, right? The last few elections have been the most consequential elections of our lifetime, and people joke about it, but it's true. It's true. And if you don't recognize that it's true, that's a shame, because it is. These are consequential elections, and the stakes are super high, as anyone who's living in a community that's being terrorized by ICE will tell you, as anyone whose undocumented family members are at risk of deportation will tell you, right? As any trans kid in a red state will tell you, right? Like, there are huge consequences to these election results. So yes, the stakes are super, super high. What I think most regular people don't realize is that Democratic politicians know that. They know that, and they care, and they want to get it right. The problem is that they are so out of touch with the rest of the country that the way they go about caring is they hire the best political consultants, right? The sort of most experienced political consultants who were trained on Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill and let's, sort this out over some coffee and, our disagreements don't define us and we want the best for America, whatever, right? Like this sort of bygone era of politics when a press release could change the entire direction of a campaign, when, the nightly news was watched by most Americans, right? So those old school consultants get hired by these Democratic politicians because they're like, well, they have results. We want to use our campaign funds to hire these people because we want to win, because it matters. This is Occam's razor, guys. I think a lot of people attribute this sort of fecklessness of Democratic elected officials to this idea of, oh, well, they're evil or they're controlled opposition or they're just fundamentally incorrigible people. I just think that's so myopic and Manichaean and oversimplified. The reality is they're stupid. A lot of them are stupid, or they're out of touch, and they're making the best decision with the information before them, but they do not have the right information. So all this poll tested messaging and saying, well, we want our opportunity, economy, and we're going to run on these super marginal tax cuts while, the fact of the matter is that the healthcare and education systems in this country are broken. We have staggering wealth inequality, and we need big structural reform in this country. And that's scary to people. It doesn't poll test well, at a policy level. And so Democrats are skittish to get behind it. What Ta-Nehisi Coates is saying is also politically savvy, which is we need to pin down our values and stick to them, even if they're not politically viable, right? He says sometimes there are going to be periods when we lose. And Ezra Klein says, I think that's fatalistic. It's not. The reality is sometimes we lose. So anyway, right, the problem, I think, with a lot of these sort of top-line Democratic campaigns at the national level is that there's the Ezra Klein-style commitment to winning at all costs. And the costs are any semblance of strong values or convictions, right? Or at least the appearance thereof. What I think Ta-Nehisi Coates is saying is very astute, politically speaking, too, as well as being morally correct, as well as being analytically correct. He's saying we need values, and our only value can't be winning, because then we're just as bad as the other guys. Anyway, long-winded answer. That's my take, but I encourage everyone to watch it for themselves because it's interesting and it's good, and I think it really sort of exemplifies a lot of the divides in the Democratic Party and on the left. Okay, so Kyle Jacob sent me a DM, and he asks, what do you think would happen if there was a national event that needed all American citizens to listen, an event similar to 9/11? I'm very curious as to what Trump's reaction would be. He's not a leader, and he passes the buck at every turn. So this is a good and insightful question. I think it hits at perhaps Donald Trump's biggest weakness, which is he has really come about at a moment where the appearance of leadership, the appearance of winning, the appearance of politics is so much more important than the actual substance. This is a guy who used to have a TV show, right? And he understands that he can get away with appearance not being backed by substance, if he creates the appearance, the verisimilitude of winning, of success, he doesn't need to actually deliver, because appearance, ratings, winning the day is all that matters. This is not true in a crisis. And I think at some point in the next 3.5 years, we're going to see the chickens coming home to roost, in terms of the fact that we have seen the CDC gutted, we have seen NIH gutted, we have seen so many of these government agencies completely gutted. And the Trump administration is taking advantage of the fact that we have taken these functions of government for granted, and they're gutting these functions. That is going to have consequences. And whether it takes like an actual crisis for those consequences to bear themselves out or not, right? Those consequences are going to come home to roost, to mix several metaphors at once. In 2020, when COVID sort of began to ravage the United States of America, I started to get really concerned, because we were in the lead up to Trump's re-election bid. And I was thinking, shit, he is going to rally the country together around this crisis, and he's going to win re-election handily, right? Kind of in the way that George W. Bush rallied the country after 9/11. To be clear, I do not think, if 9/11 happened today, I do not think the country would rally together the same way it did then. I just don't think that would happen. I think there would be some sort of cohesion, there would be some abandonment of politics, but not at the levels we saw after 9/11, not even close. And I don't think it would last. I think we would start yelling at each other immediately, especially if Trump was, in charge. Because the reality is this: if 9/11 happened today, it would probably be because Donald Trump put a 20-year-old Discord mod in charge of the Center for Counterterrorism.
Oh! Somebody! Oh!
The Center for Counterterrorism. These are the analysts that caught bin Laden. And now there's a 20-year-old with zero government experience who used to be a Discord mod or something like that, who's now in charge of that. So if 9/11 happened today, it would be for that reason exactly. And so no, there wouldn't be rally around the flag, because the blood would be on Donald Trump's hands. But, I think COVID is an apt example, because the Trump administration did not seize on that politically advantageous opportunity, but also the policy aspect. They don't care what's best for the country. They don't. They care what's best for them, right? That's why they use the edifice of the American government to enrich themselves. That's why they do this, right? That's why there's all this corruption. They care about themselves. They don't care about the country. And in a crisis, I think that is most starkly clear. It is in a crisis, Hurricane Katrina, 9/11, all these things, that the federal government must step up. It is incumbent upon the federal government to respond. And if the federal government is more interested in protecting the brand or the image or the campaign of the sitting president, if they're more interested in the appearance of winning rather than the actual reality of winning, they will fail at their imperative to lead. And that happened during COVID. It happened during Katrina, and it could happen again. And so, yeah, I think crises really do make or break political leaders. And I think they have broken Trump once with COVID, and they will do it again if, God forbid, there were another crisis. Okay, what if I don't like beans asks, what are you studying in school? I am studying philosophy, and sometimes that surprises people. They're like, oh, I would have thought poli-sci. Here's the thing. I love politics. I've taken politics classes here at my school, and they're great, and the politics department here is great. For me, philosophy is sort of the highest form of thought, in a way. It exercises the most parts of my brain. I'm a very sort of conceptual and theoretical thinker. And for me, coming into college, I wanted to do a ton of things. I wanted to read books and analyze them. I wanted to talk about politics and think about politics. I wanted to talk about history. I wanted to explore other things like philosophy, like religion. I wanted to explore what it means to lead a good and fulfilling life. What right and wrong are, how we think and the way that we approach the world, right? These sort of big concepts like love, belonging, all these things. And for me, philosophy combines enough of those things under the same umbrella. And it's a discipline that is always expanding. Right? Especially right now, the definition of what counts as philosophy is growing a lot. And that's exciting. And so what I love about philosophy is that I get to do all those things. I get to stretch my mind, and it is in so many ways like change the way I see the world. And I think philosophy gets this bad rap as this kind of like highfalutin, like, oh, well, it's not even that important. It's just like, what is life? And like, it's stupid and ephemeral and it doesn't even matter. But it's like, no, this is a discipline that's like about how to live in the world, how to understand the world, how to be in the world. And these ideas of right versus wrong, good arguments versus bad arguments, knowledge versus belief, what is truth, what counts as truth. These are super important questions, especially right now. And that's why I want to study them. And I also don't know a lot about them. It wasn't something I knew a lot about coming into college. I know a lot about politics. I took a 101 class. I didn't even study for the exams, right? It was off the dome because I knew all this stuff already. That's not fair. I didn't know everything already. A lot of the time it was giving shape and a general theory to stuff that I already observed or understood at sort of a subconscious level. Anyway, that being said, I'm studying philosophy, and that's why. So, MurphTag13 asks, why are all the pundits shocked and surprised that Trump is using the DOJ for personal vendettas when John Roberts specifically cited it as the example in the executive branch for which he has absolute immunity? Don't get me wrong, I'm not okay with it. No, I get what you're saying. It's a good question. Why are people shocked? Why are they surprised? To tell you the truth, I don't think they're genuinely shocked. I don't think they're genuinely surprised. Like journalists, people in the media. What I think the sort of appearance of shock or surprise might, because look, these people follow politics closely. They follow Trump closely. They cover him. And they know this stuff. They know what John Roberts wrote. They also know what Donald Trump was saying on the campaign trail, which was, I'm going to go after my enemies, right? I'm going to use the DOJ to weaponize, the levers of the federal government to punish my enemies. And now we're seeing that borne out with Tish James and Jim Comey and these people who, John Bolton, right? These people who it's like, ugh, really? We have to we have to defend Jim Comey? But we do, right? Because, and there are these crack lawyers, right, who should be disbarred, who are signing these indictments that aren't even lawful under the Appointments Clause, right? Literally unconstitutional indictments because they're unconstitutional legal appointments. So, no, I don't think these journalists or these media people are actually genuinely surprised. But I am not, I really don't think that, this impulse for people to be like, well, why are you surprised, is very healthy. Because I don't understand really what it achieves. There's actually, a huge political function, I think, to shock or surprise, or even if it's performative, right? Because what it tells us is that the thing that's happened matters. It crosses a line. And if we're like, well, this doesn't matter, this is expected, we're giving sort of permission. We are giving Trump and these politicians permission to change our country and change our political norms and values by saying, well, this is expected. This is the new normal. It's not normal. And we shouldn't treat it like it's normal. We should treat it like the outrageous injustice that it is. We should treat it as the brazen attack on freedom and the rule of law that it is. And we should act surprised, even if we're not surprised, deep down. And so being like, well, this isn't surprising, to me, I'm not really sure, and maybe this is just a gap in my understanding, but to me, saying I'm not really surprised, or this is to be expected now, it's not clear to me what the function of doing that is, or what the benefit of doing that is. Some people might say, well, it allows us to be realistic about what's going on. But it's like, really, does it? It doesn't feel very realistic to me to be normalizing it and being like, well, this is to be expected. Because it's not. I don't want it to be expected. I don't want it to be normal. I want it to be outrageous, which is what it is. And in a way, this is something that I think Trump and his followers understand, is the way that we act about politics is the way politics is, right? And these little acts of politics, in the way we talk and react and respond, have huge implications. And in acting not surprised, in saying, well, this is the new normal, in a way we're giving up the game and we're saying, it's okay. We're saying it's okay. And I know that's not what this person is trying to say, but it tacitly, that's what it says. And I know people disagree with me on that, and I know that, like, if you follow my page on TikTok closely, like, this is something I've been banging the drum about and being super, like, annoying and preachy about. But it's true. It is true. And, like, Orwell wrote about this. Tim Snyder wrote about this, right, on tyranny. Like, the first rule is do not obey in advance. And by saying, well, this is to be expected, you're kind of obeying in advance, right? You are giving up the political function of being outraged, which is what this is. It's outrageous. And we should be outraged, even if we're not surprised, per se. Okay, Nicole says, do you think education, i.e. the kids can't read or do simple math, student loan forgiveness, affordable education, etc., should be something Democrats could run on and unite people behind? I feel like no politician is talking about it, and I'm worried about it for sure. Absolutely, Nicole. I think there are a lot of things that Democrats could be running on that they're not running on, and education is one of them. And, like, we haven't really had a national conversation about education and education standards since No Child Left Behind, which is sad because that was a Republican president, and that law is continuing to do, like, real damage to the educational institutions of America. And to be clear, like, public education in America is broken. It is not the fault of teachers, right? Like, for me, and I know I'm biased because my parents were teachers, but, like, teachers are saints. The fact that in America today, like, a teacher gets paid a pittance. Teachers barely get paid. They are educating the young minds of this country. They're barely getting paid. They have no resources to do what they're doing. They're often teaching towards a test. Their kids are struggling in the classroom and at home. And these teachers, if they don't quit from exhaustion and being chewed up by the gears of broader systems that are outside of their control, they continue valiantly to fight for their kids. And that, to me, is, like, the highest civic virtue. Those people are heroes. And, you know, like, we need to do, like, big structural change in this country in order to make education better. And I think in a lot of ways that starts with compensating teachers fairly. To me, the function that teachers serve to our society is so vital, they should be paid on the caliber of doctors and lawyers, if not more, right? And the fact that they are not is a crime, I think. I think it's criminal. So that's for starters. The other thing is, I think that at the level of education, like, and I've thought a lot about, like, education as a constitutional right, and there are a lot of these sort of, like, cases from the 60s and 70s about after Brown v. Board, right? Like, there's this tacit undercurrent in the decision in Brown versus Board of Education from 1954, which is a school desegregation case, that basically, like, there's an implication in the opinion that, like, really there's kind of an implied constitutional right to education that stems from Reconstruction and the fact that, like, one of the conditions for re-entry into the Union of these former Confederate states was that they set up public education systems and that they provide education equally to everyone, right? Like, that's one of the undercurrents, and they don't say education is a right under the Constitution or an implied right, but it definitely is, right? Like, if you look at the history and tradition, as a lot of these Supreme Court justices would want us to do, right? Like, it definitely is. And it's interesting to see, there was a case, a 5-4 case in 1973, the same term as Roe versus Wade, called San Antonio versus Rodriguez. Super interesting. Definitely go read it. But it's about, like, whether the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution guarantees a right to children in public schools to not have these super disparate funding schemes that make hugely wealthy districts have insanely good public schools and hugely poor districts have the worst public schools. The fact that in the United States of America there are schoolhouses that are overcrowded, there are kids who are learning from textbooks that are 20, 30 years old, that's insane. That's insane. And so, yes, I think Democrats should absolutely run on that. There are a lot of things that Democrats should run on. And, like, Nicole and anyone out there, if you care about education, run for school board, run for Congress, run for the State House, do something in your community to help education, right? And run for office. You can be the Democrat. We can be the Democrats who run on education. Go to runforsomething.net. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but they set regular people up with campaign resources to do this stuff. And they have record-breaking numbers of signups right now. There's about to be wave Democratic elections across the country. Now is the time to get in and to change things. And we can really start fighting back. So if you want to change education in this country, run. Go to runforsomething.net and figure out how you can get involved or support a local candidate or whatever, right? But like, we can be the people who run on education, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, Annalise asks, do you have any podcast recommendations? Boy, do I, Annalise. I'm going to go through and see what I have here. Okay, stay with me here. There's this fantastic podcast called Supreme Court Oral Arguments. As you can see, I'm currently listening to one. These are a little bit tough to get into, but once you're in, you're in. And to me, I don't know who's doing this, who's putting these on here. You are a saint. Because the Supreme Court intentionally tries to make these hard to find. They take forever to post them. Sometimes they edit stuff out, which is super weird. They stream live whenever they're held, which is good. But, like, there are lots of things about the Supreme Court's oral arguments and the fact that, like, they're not more available to the public. Like, that really gets on my nerves. But that being said, this is a great place to start and to just listen to these justices and the lawyers and the arguments they're making, right? Try and get a sense for it yourself. Because part of the reason the Supreme Court thrives on this ability to be like, well, did you listen to the argument? Did you read the opinion? Right? To be like, well, you don't understand what's going on and you can't criticize us. I can criticize you because I have heard the questions you asked. I think it is a civic virtue to pay attention to this kind of thing. And even if you don't understand it, because, you know, I follow the Supreme Court pretty closely. I like to read about the cases before I listen to them. I still don't understand a lot of what's going on. That's fine. But it gives me a sense of like, okay, I'm hearing what's happening in the country. I'm hearing the disagreements. I'm hearing the work that the courts are doing. And there's something oddly comforting about that. So that would be my first recommendation. Not gonna lie, I'm still a fan of Pod Save America. I'm sorry. I know. I don't agree with everything they say. Their voices get annoying. I can't, like, listen to them back to back forever. I still think what they're doing is really important, right? And they are one of the biggest left-leaning new media organizations out there. They're working with people like Hassan. They're sort of like an extraneous sort of part of the Zoran Mamdani Brains Trust. They're trying to influence Democratic politicians to adopt the Zoran Mamdani model. They know ball. In a way, they know ball. And I wish people were able to tolerate disagreement more. What's interesting about a lot of these podcasts, actually, is I like to listen to a lot of podcasts that challenge the way I see the world. And so maybe these recommendations you will find to be utterly repulsive, but I don't agree with everything that a podcast host says, and I don't have to listen to them. Maybe that's different for other people. I don't know. But so Pod Save America, I guess. Honestly, Tim Miller's Bulwark podcast, I don't think people realize this, but some of these former Never Trump Republicans who have sort of slowly started to inch to the left since Trump came onto the scene, Tim Miller used to be a spokesman for Jeb Bush. Now he is hosting these podcasts where he's like, feed them to the alligators. Like, he hasn't said that, but like, I think some of these Never Trump Republicans feel so much betrayal and so much anger at their own party that they are more outraged than a lot of people on the left about what's going on in the country right now. And that is healthy, I think. And it's good to listen to. Like, listening to Tim Miller talk about this stuff, he is fucking outraged. And I think that's good. I think it's cathartic, and it's good to hear. And I love this about the I've Had It podcast, too, which is another recommendation I'll submit. They're just the right level of fucking pissed that we need right now. And so, but you may not agree with everything they have to say at the Bulwark, because it is a sort of like center-right media company. But when they are laying into Trump, boy, are they laying into him. Strict Scrutiny is a great supplement to Supreme Court oral arguments because these ladies, it's Leah Littman, Melissa Murray, and Kate Shaw, 3 female law professors who do not give a fuck. They make fun of these Supreme Court justices, and they make fun of their stupid opinions, and again, very cathartic. Okay, here's a good one. There's this history podcast called Fiasco, and they do these sort of like mini-series on historical events, mostly like political scandals. They did a great season on Bush v. Gore. That is so good. They did a great season on Iran-Contra, which I loved. Right now they're doing a season on Benghazi, which is so good, and I've been binging it. So definitely check that out. It's called Fiasco. It's with Leon Neyfakh of Slow Burn fame. I almost forgot. Okay, here's one that, okay, is not for the weak, right? This one I disagree with a lot, but it's still, I think, very intellectually stimulating. It is a podcast called Divided Argument. It's hosted by Will Bode and Dan Epps. Will Bode is an originalist constitutional law scholar. He definitely leans to the right, but he's also a never-Trumper. In 2016, he penned a letter, a public letter that was published in some newspaper, I think, that was originalist legal scholars against Trump. And he basically endorsed Hillary Clinton and was I may not agree with her on policy, but I care about the Constitution and Trump does not. So he was out there from the beginning. He wrote a great set of articles about the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment, basically saying, look, Trump is ineligible to be president. And he was making an originalist argument. And he basically tore these justices a new one in this article called Sweeping Section 3 Under the Rug, which is great. Highly recommend you read. Where he's basically look, everything that the originalist justices have stood for, of being we're going to stand up for the original public meaning of the Constitution, even if it's unpopular, right? Even when, our political policy preferences get in the way, we're going to stick to our guns and we're going to, carry out the will of the framers. He said, you abandon all of that. He didn't say this directly, but I'm interpreting him as saying this. You abandon all of that by giving way to the political vicissitudes of the day. And that's what they did. And he called them out. And so, he's still very defensive of the court at times, but that to me is healthy, to have that voice being this is what the court's doing, making the best possible case for it, because it challenges what I think. And I rarely agree with it, but it is still interesting and helps me form an informed opinion on the court, and is a great supplement to strict scrutiny, which can be very aggressively anti-Supreme Court, which, fair. I will say there's a Supreme Court podcast called 5-4, which is not my favorite. I see a lot of people recommending that. I don't like that podcast. I just don't like it. It's what I like about strict scrutiny is that there's a lightheartedness to it. 5-4 is just to borrow the quote from Family Guy, it insists upon itself. It's just so cynical. And, they I don't know, maybe I'm just a total bitch, but they were I listened to this one podcast episode where they literally called Sandra Day O'Connor the first woman Supreme Court justice. And, not really that evil. She wrote some evil opinions, but not really that evil. And they called her an old bag. And I was what the fuck? That's just a lot. That's a lot, Robin. And I'm not really into that. So, but, if you are, power to you. Sometimes I also listen to Modern Love, just if I need some hope. So that's good. Oh, The Bald and the Beautiful. Some of you who know, the girls who know. But yeah, highly recommend The Bald and the Beautiful. Unless you don't have a 5-year-old's sense of humor, then maybe I don't recommend it. But yeah, it's great. And I'm a Drag Race super fan, in case that wasn't already obvious. So, and The Bald and the Beautiful is peak. Okay, Genevieve asks, thoughts on whether we'll make it to 2028 elections / if they'll happen. Just saw the Dominion voting machine sale news. I understand why people are scared about this. There's a lot of misinformation that's out there. Here's the thing. It is not possible to cancel elections in this country. It's just not possible. Our elections are decentralized, right? They are run at the county and precinct level, right? In order to steal an election, you need to coordinate across every single precinct it is not possible. It is not possible. And I think that it is imperative for us, politically speaking, even if it looks like there's going to be some monkey business happening in upcoming elections, we cannot let that discourage us from getting involved and giving everything we've got to trying to win these elections. Because they want us to obey in advance. They don't want to have to rig an election. They want to be able to, try and suppress turnout by making people hopeless. And so talking about this and being well, we're not going to have elections, that's already giving into their project. They want us to be asking those questions. And so I understand why people are scared, but we've got to cut this out because it really is corrosive to civic values. And by the way, people are running for office and they're winning all across this country. And these elections are still safe and secure. If Trump and these Republicans were going to try and fix an election, what they would be doing is something sort of like what they did in the 2018 midterms, where they made up this whole manufactured crisis of the caravan coming, right? They would try and use the levers of power or use their dominance over the right-wing media ecosystem to try and drum up some fake crisis to make people not want to turn out. Or they would try and demoralize people at the outset and be like, well, we're going to steal the election so that all these Democrats don't turn out to vote because they think the elections are just going to be fixed. That's what they would try and do, I think. Because it is very hard after the fact to fiddle with election results. Our election systems, thankfully, are very airtight. And the reality is, in a lot of these sort of, what do they call it? Multipolar authoritarian regimes, like these hybrid regimes where they have like Viktor Orban or Vladimir Putin, like they still hold elections, but the election results are tainted by the fact that, you know, the government has, over the course of time, over the course of several elections, worked slowly to corrode the opposition and make them politically ineffective. We can't let that happen. It hasn't happened yet in America, and we can't let it happen. And because it is really hard to fix an election, and I don't think Trump would even try. I think he believes that he can win elections so long as they continue to do their monkey business in the way of campaigning and like deploying these campaign strategies that are outrageous and stupid and out of bounds, right? And bending the truth to their will. That's what they would try and do. So yes, we will have 2028 elections. Yes, we will have 2026 elections. It is imperative that we vote and we give all of our energy and time and passion towards winning those elections. Because to act like they're going to be fixed or they're not going to happen is not only wrong as a matter of like the evidence before us, but also politically self-sabotaging. We don't want to, have some kind of situation where we're not turning out to vote because we think the election is going to be fixed. But really the fixing of the election is giving people the impression that it's going to be fixed, therefore making them not turn out to vote. And look, in a few weeks, there are going to be big elections in Virginia, New Jersey. There are going to be some special elections across the country. We're going to get the first round of like real, solid, big election results since 2024. Once that happens, these things are going to start moving really quickly, right? Because those elections are probably going to be, assuming everything goes according to plan and people continue to fight for victory, those elections are probably going to be blowout victories for Democrats. A year from now, we will be in the middle of the midterms. Those are likely to be blowout victories for Democrats. Once Democrats get sworn in, assuming they take back control of the House, assuming they take back control of the Senate. If they take back control of the Senate, we can stop Trump from appointing judges. We can stop Trump from appointing these crack cabinet members. We can conduct more vigorous oversight. Once we take back the House, we will be able to conduct oversight and we will be able to put this administration on its ass. And once that happens, the momentum will really profoundly shift. And I think it will start to feel less like we're completely out of control and more like, okay, things are moving in the right direction. So there's rhythms to this. A lot can happen in a year or 2 years. And so I absolutely think that we should just keep pushing and, I think it'll be a burst of energy. It'll be a shot in the arm when we win in Virginia and New Jersey, assuming we pull out all the stops and fight for that victory and don't give up or become complacent. After that, it's a year to the midterms, and then the ball's really going to be rolling. And after the midterms happen, then people are going to be running for president and trying to, barnstorm Iowa. And that's going to be interesting too. And I think we've forgotten some of these rhythms of politics, but, this stuff happens at consistent intervals, and it's easy to feel like we're out of control right now. We're on the right track, and we just have to keep pushing. Okay, so Ariel and Bella Hadid real account says, please do book recs. Okay, so if you want detailed book recs, send me an email, and I will send you, as one person who has already done this knows, I will send you more book recs than you want. I will send you a tirade of book recs. Hold on. I'm going to go to my bookshelf. I'll be right back. Okay. Several recommendations. Consider the Lobster, David Foster Wallace. Stellar essay collection. Lots of great stuff in here. So lucid and smart and interesting. I had no idea people could write like this. Song of Solomon, Toni Morrison. This is a great, super interesting, a little bit surrealist, like Southern Gothic portrait of one man's journey through America as a black man who's the son of a landlord and a sort of like wealthy heiress almost of a town doctor in a northern city in Michigan and his journey to the South to rediscover his family roots. It's about his interesting aunt who his father forbids him from hanging out with. Her name is Pilate, as in Pontius Pilate. She doesn't have a belly button. She's a bootlegger who lives with her daughter and her granddaughter. It's so good. It's so good. It is, takes place in the real world. It's a real, sort of like realistic, quasi-historical fiction book. But the way that she tells it, and this is like, to me, the mark of the best fiction writers ever. The way she tells it, it feels like there's magic everywhere. So this book is my favorite book. It's one of my favorite books. I have two favorite books. It's this and Bleak House by Charles Dickens, which is a bit more of a slog, so I don't usually put it in book recommendations. You gotta, if I know you and I know that you would like Dickens, I'll recommend it, but otherwise, I'm cautious. Right now, I'm reading Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. I hope that's how you pronounce it. Very good. I like it so far. I'm like, I don't know, almost a third of the way done. Okay, I'm sort of alternating between fiction and nonfiction, but whatever. This is expensive because it's a Library of America collection. There's about 1,000 pages of stuff in here. It's all good. Any nonfiction by James Baldwin is fucking stellar. And I didn't pick out Giovanni's Room, but I also recommend that because that helps to really understand some of the sort of like moral psychology at the heart of Baldwin's nonfiction, and sort of like helps his nonfiction really pop. But this is so good. Everything in here is amazing. This is also included in that collection, but if you want like one thing instead of buying the full Library of America collection, The Fire Next Time. This is fucking amazing. Philosophy people, this is a great introduction to Western philosophy. This is Bertrand Russell's The History of Western Philosophy. Just super approachable, easy to understand, helps me in a lot of classes because it just helps me sort of like get an understanding of what everyone else is talking about when they're saying like, oh, well, Kant and whatever. Great stuff. Highly recommend if you're into philosophy. Okay, full disclosure, I have not read this, but it's been on my list for a long time. My uncle gave me this for Christmas last year. What Can We Hope For? Richard Rorty. It's political philosophy about hope, which, duh. Okay, and these might be controversial, but as you can see, I reference these a lot. These are the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers. The Federalist papers were written by 3 of the Founding Fathers under the same pseudonym or pen name. The 3 Founding Fathers were Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. These are essays that were published in newspapers around the American colonies, or the newly independent American nation, in the original 13 states. And they argue for the ratification of our current U.S. Constitution. And so it's really helpful because it gives an understanding of what our framers understood the Constitution to mean, or at least the way that they presented the meaning of the Constitution to the people that they were trying to get to ratify the Constitution. And it gives you a sense for the disagreements they had. People who had all previously agreed that America ought to be independent had some really fierce disagreements about the Constitution. And a lot of people don't know this, but like Thomas Jefferson was a very fierce opponent of ratifying the Constitution we now have. And yet he served as President and Secretary of State under that same Constitution, swore an oath to it. So it's interesting. It's interesting. And this stuff is so good. And if I have to make specific recommendations, I'd say Federalists 78 through 84 are my personal favorites. But these are super interesting. And this is a good companion. Like, this I wouldn't read on its own. I like to have it a companion with this. This is the Anti-Federalist Papers, which gives you a sense for the other side of the equation, the people who are arguing against the ratification of the Constitution and what they thought. So, above all, those are just some recommendations. If you'd like a full video of book recommendations, I can do that. I could do several of those, to be quite frank. Another book that I don't have with me, but that I will recommend anyway, because it is so good, is a book that I got from the library a few years ago, but it's a great introduction to one issue that I'm super interested in and passionate about and have read and thought a lot about, which is the question of how to interpret the Constitution. And Cass Sunstein, who has written some stuff I don't love, and like I'm sort of ambivalent about him as a figure, but this book that he wrote is really good. It's a book called, I think it's just called How to Interpret the Constitution by Cass Sunstein, and it's basically an overview of all the different like competing theories about how to interpret the Constitution, and a very good introduction to a super interesting, I think, debate that implicates history, the philosophy of law, semantics, language, so many interesting things. So those are my recs. All right, so that's a lot. If you ask a question that I didn't respond to, I'm very sorry. I will probably respond to it in the next mailbag if I do this again. That being said, these are all the sort of questions I'm going to answer for now. But if you have more questions, feel free to leave them here, wherever here is. If there's like comments or things, feel free to leave them there. I'm not totally sure where I'm going to put this yet. Or send them to my email, which I'll attach somewhere to show notes, description. Not quite sure, again, where I'm going to put that, but if you can't find it, it's bn.campaigndispatch@gmail.com. And if you send me your questions, I will try and answer them. All right, thanks very much for your attention and support, and I will see you all soon.